time, these animals can develop special adaptations to their unique habitats, and these 8 have done just that. Each one lives in a very specific spot, and it's really, really good at living there. Let's start with the Santa Cruz kangaroo rat. It's a small rodent that you can only find in the Santa Cruz sandhills, a small swatch of land in California. Kangaroo rats get their name because they use powerful hind legs to
Oops, sorry.
do. Of the 23 species of kangaroo rat, these guys are especially suited for the sandy soil and shrub-filled landscape they call home. Santa Cruz kangaroo rats are slow to mature and reproduce, which helps them conserve energy and survive during droughts. But this also makes it harder for populations to recover from threats like habitat loss, which isn't great news for them or the environment. As it turns out, this kangaroo rat is a keystone species, an animal with a big effect on the ecosystem where it lives. In other words, if they disappeared, their habitat would permanently change. See, kangaroo rats make a lot of burrows and bury seeds to eat later, so they're unintentionally helping plant populations grow and stay healthy. In the late 1900s, researchers even ran an experiment where they excluded 3 species of kangaroo rats from small areas of desert shrubland over 10 years. Without these rodents, the regions were converted into much grassier terrain with different plants and animals living nearby. So these critters aren't just endemic to the Santa Cruz sandhills, they're also really important to make sure a bunch of other living things have a sandy, shrubby home. In the water-filled caves of the Edwards Aquifer in Hays County, Texas, there lives a creature that looks like it crawled right out of a sci-fi movie. The Texas blind salamander is a ghostly pinkish white, and it doesn't have eyes, because who needs pigment or vision when you live in the pitch black? Instead of relying on their eyesight, these bizarre salamanders hunt tiny aquatic invertebrates by sensing movement in the water around them. They're also really sensitive to pollution, and they need really clean water full of oxygen to thrive. Droughts in the 1950s nearly dried up the aquifer, and people were concerned about these endemic amphibians' chances of survival. In fact, Texas blind salamanders were on the very first list of federally protected species after the Endangered Species Act was passed in 1966. These salamanders are still considered to be vulnerable because of their small population size and limited range. But even if a disaster hits the wild population, captive breeding by humans hopefully means this species will continue to survive. Unlike amphibians, only one lizard in the world is at home in the ocean: the marine iguana. These peaceful herbivores are endemic to the Galapagos Islands and are probably descended from a South American iguana that somehow drifted over and adapted to a watery lifestyle. Over time, these lizards evolved powerful, slightly flat tails to propel them deep below the ocean surface so they can forage for algae and seaweed. Not to mention, they have special glands in their heads that let them filter out all the extra sodium chloride and potassium chloride they suck in from the salty water and their food. These glands are connected to their noses, so they get rid of all the salt by sneezing it out. In the late 1900s, scientists observed that this iguana species occasionally interbreeds with terrestrial iguanas on one tiny island where their mating seasons overlap. Like mules or ligers, though, the hybrid iguanas are sterile. Even though these marine iguanas are the surfer dudes of the reptile world, they had a bad rep with Charles Darwin, who described them as hideous looking. But hey, we think these guys and their salty sneezes are pretty neat. Thousands of years ago, rising sea levels filled a lake on the South Pacific island of Palau with seawater and a few jellyfish. Today, the lake is cut off from the ocean, but it's still home to some unique golden jellyfish that have evolved to thrive there. They get their yellowish hue from a bunch of tiny protists called zooxanthellae living inside their tissues. It's a mutualistic relationship, which means both organisms benefit from the close quarters. Over the course of each day, the jellyfish migrate to follow the sunlight so the protists can photosynthesize and make lots of energy-containing molecules. The jellyfish sometimes hunt, but also use some of these chemicals to fuel their metabolism, and their waste cycles back to help feed the protists. You might have heard of this lake before because snorkeling with the jellyfish is a popular tourist attraction. Their stinging cells aren't powerful enough to harm humans. Visitors just have to be careful not to dive too deep, because at the bottom of the lake is a layer of toxic hydrogen sulfide and other chemicals where lots of other microorganisms live. The daily migrations of the jellyfish churn up nutrients and microbes in the lake that help fuel its unique food chain. But this year, the population isn't doing so well, and scientists aren't exactly sure why there's a decline. Some think it's because of a drought caused by El Nino, which has made the lake saltier and thrown off the nutrient balance. And if the jellyfish population doesn't bounce back, the fate of the whole lake's ecosystem might be in jeopardy. Now, golden jellyfish endemic to a single island lake might seem cool, but you ain't seen nothing yet. In fact, this next animal is kind of hard to see at all. The world's littlest lizard is a chameleon tiny enough to sit on the head of a match. It's only a couple of centimeters long, including its tail, and it's one of the smallest possible complex vertebrates on Earth. Its home is a small island called Nosihara, off the northwest coast of Madagascar, where it was recently discovered in leaf litter and bushes by scientists in 2012. These guys are an extreme example of island dwarfism, a trend of isolated island species evolving to become smaller to thrive in a limited environment. The island of Madagascar has some other very small chameleon species, so scientists think that this especially tiny lizard might actually be the result of double island dwarfism. In other words, maybe the already mini chameleons from Madagascar hopped over to Nosy Hara at some point and became even tiny. Island dwarfism may have produced tiny lizards, but island gigantism is also a thing. Case in point, the tree lobsters of Lord Howe Island, a little spot off the east coast of Australia. Now, before you go imagining giant crustaceans leaping from branch to branch, I'm going to break it to you. Tree lobsters aren't actually lobsters, even though they've got big, sometimes reddish exoskeletons. They're giant, flightless stick insects. Islands can be limited in resources, but that also means fewer predators and less competition. So sometimes animals that colonize islands become bigger over time instead of smaller. And measuring at around 12 centimeters long, these guys are among the heaviest insects in the world. Though these enormous stick insects were well known to early colonists on the island, no one had seen any since the 1960s. People thought that invasive rats drove them to extinction, but not all hope was lost. In 2001, scientists followed some rumors and discovered just 24 of them living under a bush on a nearby rock spire called Ball's Pyramid. Now, there's a colony of tree lobsters at the Melbourne Zoo, thanks to captive breeding. And eventually, researchers hope to reintroduce them to their original home, after getting rid of those invasive rats. You may picture most monkeys swinging through trees or living in forests, but troops of geladas spend most of the time on the ground, endemic to the highlands of Ethiopia. At one point, troops of ground-dwelling, grass-eating monkeys roamed most of Africa. But today, geladas are the last surviving species in their genus. About the size of baboons, they travel across high-elevation meadows in large herd-like groups. Mostly, they spend days sitting down on their plump rear ends and grazing on abrasive plants with specialized teeth. And at night, they sleep on ledges of cliff faces for protection from predators. Despite the remoteness of their mountain home, geladas are still starting to feel the pinch of human encroachment. The edges of their habitat are slowly being taken over by agriculture, so there's some conservation efforts to try and protect these monkeys. Last but not least, the Inaccessible Island Rail's name says it all. This bird lives in a place that is very, very hard to get to. Rails are ground-dwelling wetland birds related to cranes. Many of them can fly, but the Inaccessible Island Rail is actually the world's smallest flightless bird at about 17 centimeters long. I mean, why bother flying when you live on a tiny island with no predators? This bird lives in small family groups, builds dome-shaped nests out of grass, and spends its time eating small invertebrates, berries, and seeds. Now, that's not the most exciting life, but they've managed to survive in a pretty incredible place. Inaccessible Island is an extinct volcano ringed by sheer cliffs in the middle of the South Pacific Ocean, and it's only about 16 kilometers square. And the only way to get there is by boat from South Africa, which takes about a week. So if you're a bird watcher looking to add this rail to your list, well, good luck. The power of evolution means that animals have been able to adapt to life almost anywhere, from lightless water-filled caves in Texas to rocks off the coast of Australia. But living in only one place does have a downside. Like they say, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because your species might be wiped out by a natural or man-made disaster. So that's why some researchers are looking out for the welfare of these unique animals, because ecosystems might suffer, and Earth would be a little less interesting without them. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow, and thanks.
All right, so now I want you to think. Think about some of the different animals that you saw, and I want you to think about some of the uniqueness to them for living in that certain area. So think about 1 to 2, and what were you like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Didn't really think about that. I personally liked the chameleon. That was super cute. Ooh, I liked that one of you guys said that it didn't have eyes because it lived in the dark. We see that a lot. We see that if organisms live in a certain environment where they actually don't use a part of their body, that they actually tend to lose it or it becomes smaller. Just like that island rail, it didn't fly anymore because it just doesn't need to. There's no predators around to eat it, so it lost that ability over time. Ooh, I like who said the kangaroo mouse. That's great. Yeah, they observed that they could see changes in the environment based on just them. Yeah, you guys had all really good answers. One of the ones one of the things I put on there, do you guys see the animal that I put on your guys' slide? Does anybody know what that's called? It's called a pangolin. It's really cute, isn't it? It's a very unique species, and it's being traded a lot right now, like in animal, like black markets. So I wanted to highlight that. But I hope you kind of saw how just unique the world is. I mean, those are 8 animals that you would have to go to one certain location to see. And they may have not been the most interesting animal, some of them, but some of them are pretty cool. And has any of you ever been up to, I know a lot of you guys live in Arizona. It's called Montezuma's Castle. You probably see it a lot when you're riding on the I-17. There's another turnoff called Montezuma's Well. And Montezuma's Well is this kind of almost pond that always has kind of water running through it, and Native Americans lived by there. And next time you go there, if you guys go, there are a few microorganisms that are actually endemic to that one pond. And that one pond is like the size of a classroom. So think about just the uniqueness of that little tiny pond. Already has just some different things in that just pond. I went with my husband last year, and we thought that was so cool how literally this little tiny pond even has its own endemic animals. So our last topic that we're going to talk about today are invasive species. So I want you to look at this thing really quickly, and I'll give you a hint. We talk about it a lot in Arizona, so that's why I wanted to put it. If you don't know the answers, just take your best guess. This is kind of just us prefacing this, so don't be afraid to be wrong. But tell me what it is. Just looking at it, do you think it's dangerous? And why is this thing considered an invasive species? Because it is very much considered an invasive species. So just take a minute or two to write this down. And like I said, do not be afraid to be wrong because we haven't really talked about it yet. We are going to talk about it right now after this. All right, so let's take about 20 more seconds. And like I said, totally okay if you get this wrong, because we're just going to be talking about it. So some of you guys got it right. Some of you guys said it is a zebra mussel, and that's exactly what it is. And you may have seen signs at different lakes that say don't move a mussel. And it's a play on words because they're talking about these guys here. What happens is these guys are an invasive species when they get into aquatic environments. And how they move from one lake to another lake is they get stuck on people's boats. And then those people drive away and they go to another lake, and then they go into the lake and the zebra mussel falls off, and then it's now in that lake. And when they usually enter into a new environment, they don't have any predators. And when we see invasive species, a lot of times they're able to take over so quickly because they don't have any predators. So they're able to just kind of overpopulate. And these zebra mussels literally will start to eat different things that other organisms need. They're also really good at clogging up like pipes that we may be using to pump water in and out of that area. They're causing a lot of issues with Arizona lakes and other states' lakes as well. So you may have seen those signs, like I said, that said don't move a mussel, because they want boaters to rinse off their lake or rinse off their boat and look for these guys before entering into another marine environment. So like I said, many of you are just going to be starting Unit 2, where you're going to be doing a lot of classification. You're going to be looking at different organisms, writing tags about those organisms, and then classifying them. The rest of you that have now finished Unit 2 are going to be talking about some of these invasive species today, and this was just one example. As you're thinking about different invasive species, you can focus on Arizona if you want. There are many invasive species here. You can focus on other areas. For example, Florida is really dealing with boa constrictors out in the wild right now. People have let them go as pets, and they have no natural predators, so they're just going out of control. And for those of you that like adventure, a future job can actually be a snake wrangler in Florida. They're paying people to go out and get these snakes because they're causing such devastation to a lot of the natural organisms that live in that environment. So to kind of wrap it up, just think about, for those of you that are going to start your invasive species project, think about where your kind of heart lies. Do you want to do something that's close to home, or do you want to go explore something else? And for those of you that are just starting Unit 2, think about all the variety of organisms on the planet Earth and kind of go back and think about that video we watched about 8 animals that only live in one little location. And then you can think about the pond in Arizona that is home to a few organisms by itself. So if you don't have any other questions, this is goodbye for us, and I will see you guys next week. If you do have any questions, go ahead and stick around, and as everybody is leaving, we can start to address that. So I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I hope everybody had a super awesome fall break, and I will see you back at this time next week.